They thought the badge made him untouchable. Sitting in the defendant's chair in the district courthouse, Officer Derek Harlan wore a crisp suit and carried a confident, almost arrogant smirk. He truly believed his uniform was a blank check for violence. But the man he had gunned down in cold blood at a flickering Chevron station was no threat. He was Major Terrence Hale, a decorated Army Ranger who had survived 3 combat tours only to be struck down on American soil. This is the harrowing story of a tragic injustice, a desperate corrupt cover-up, and the explosive trial where a rigged system was torn apart and karma finally collected its agonizing debt. One night dripping with freezing rain in the quiet suburbs of Oak Creek, Major Terrence Hale, a Bronze Star recipient and a father of 2, was exhausted. Out of uniform and wearing a simple gray-hooded sweatshirt and dark jeans, he was driving a rented Ford Explorer back from visiting his ailing mother. He had another stretch of road before he would see his wife, Vanessa, and their children. All he needed was a tank of gas and a black coffee to make it home. He pulled into the brightly lit yet deserted Chevron station right off the interstate. The neon lights hummed, casting long, distorted reflections on the wet asphalt. Terrence stepped out, swiped his credit card, and began pumping fuel. He was a man defined by discipline, his posture straight, his movements deliberate and calm. 2 blocks away, Officer Derek Harlan was cruising in his patrol car. A 15-year veteran of the Oak Creek Police Department, Harlan carried a chip on his shoulder the size of a boulder. His personnel file was thick with excessive force complaints, all miraculously buried by a police union that protected its own. He was known among his peers for his aggressive patrolling, his hair-trigger temper, and a deeply ingrained prejudice he barely bothered to hide. Harlan saw the Ford Explorer at the pumps. He slowed down. He saw a tall, athletic black man in a hoodie pumping gas in what Harlan considered his town. Without reasonable suspicion, he ran the plates. The system flagged the rental car with a minor routine administrative hold, a common glitch with rental agencies. For Harlan, it was all the excuse he needed. He killed his headlights and rolled into the gas station parking lot, stopping his cruiser at an angle that boxed Terrence in. The sudden glare of the police spotlight hit Terrence's face, blinding him. "Step away from the vehicle," Harlan barked through the PA system, his voice laced with unearned hostility. Terrence, trained in high-stress combat zones, did not panic. He calmly placed the gas nozzle back into the dispenser, raised his hands to chest level where they were clearly visible, and turned to face the blinding light. "Evening, officer," Terrence said, his voice steady, projecting over the sound of the rain. "Is there a problem?" Harlan stepped out of his cruiser, his hand already resting on the grip of his unholstered Glock. "I said step away from the damn car. Keep your hands where I can see them." "My hands are visible," Terrence replied softly. "I'm just pumping gas. This is a rental vehicle. My wallet is in my back right pocket. I have my military ID and my driver's license." "Shut your mouth," Harlan screamed, closing the distance. The rain was slicking his hair to his forehead. His eyes were wide, darting, paranoid. "Do not reach. Turn around and put your hands on the roof of the car." Terrence slowly began to comply, turning his body. "I am turning around. I am an active-duty military officer, sir. I am unarmed." It was a textbook de-escalation, but Harlan was not looking for peace. He was looking for compliance through terror. As Terrence placed his hands on the wet roof of the Explorer, Harlan closed in from behind, screaming conflicting orders. "Get your ID. Show me your ID," Harlan yelled. "You just told me to keep my hands on the roof," Terrence said, his voice taking on a firm, commanding edge. The voice of a major used to giving orders, not being bullied by a panicked officer. "Which do you want me to do? Don't you talk back to me?" Harlan lunged forward, grabbing Terrence violently by the shoulder of his hoodie to shove him against the glass window of the car. Terrence, startled by the sudden physical assault, instinctively tensed his muscles to maintain his balance on the slippery pavement. He did not strike back. He merely braced himself. "He's resisting!" Harlan shouted to absolutely no one. Terrence turned his head slightly. "I am not resisting. You asked for my ID. I am going to reach slowly to my back pocket with my right hand." "Gun! He's reaching!" Before Terrence's hand even crossed his waistline, the deafening crack of gunfire shattered the quiet night. 3 rounds fired at point-blank range struck Terrence Hale in the chest and abdomen. The sheer force threw the major backward. He collapsed onto the cold, wet concrete, the rain instantly mingling with the dark pool expanding beneath him. Terrence looked up at the sky, his breathing instantly ragged, his lungs struggling to pull in air. He did not reach for a wound. He just stared at the officer standing over him, smoke curling from the barrel of the Glock. "I told you," Terrence whispered, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "I was reaching for my ID." Harlan stood over him, breathing heavily. He did not render first aid. He did not kneel to apply pressure. He grabbed his radio. "Shots fired. Shots fired. Suspect reached for a weapon. I need EMS forthwith." Terrence Hale, a man who had survived IEDs in the valleys of Kandahar, bled to death alone on the pavement of a suburban gas station, clutching nothing but the slick, rainy air. Within minutes, the Chevron station was a chaotic sea of flashing red and blue lights. Crime scene tape was unspooled in wet, flapping ribbons. Sergeant Marcus Langford, Harlan's immediate supervisor and longtime drinking buddy, was the first on the scene. Langford found Harlan pacing near his cruiser, looking pale but remarkably composed. "What happened, Derek?" Langford asked, pulling him out of the rain and under the gas station canopy. Harlan lied smoothly, the adrenaline cementing his narrative. "Routine stop on a flagged plate. Guy was non-compliant, sweating, agitated." He spun around and reached into his waistband. "I saw a dark object. I had no choice, Marcus. He was going to kill me." Langford nodded slowly. He walked over to the body. EMS had already declared Terrence deceased. Paramedics had cut away Terrence's hoodie. There was no weapon in his waistband. There was no weapon on the ground. The only thing in Terrence's back pocket was a brown leather wallet. When Langford flipped it open, the Department of Defense military identification card gleamed under the harsh floodlights. "Major Terrence Hale," Langford swore under his breath. He walked back to Harlan. "Derek, he's clean. He's military, an Army major." Harlan's eyes flickered with a brief, panicked realization, but the instinct for self-preservation instantly overrode it. "I swear to God he had something. Maybe he kicked it under the car." "Right," Langford said slowly. The blue wall of silence was already forming, its bricks mortared with corruption and fraternal loyalty. "We'll secure the scene. Go sit in my cruiser. Don't talk to anyone else." By morning, the Oak Creek Police Department had issued a carefully sanitized press release. It spoke of an officer-involved shooting following a confrontation with a non-compliant suspect where the officer feared for his life. They released Terrence's name, but failed to mention his military rank, his lack of a criminal record, or the fact that he was completely unarmed. But Vanessa Hale was not a woman who could be silenced by a press release. When the military casualty notification officers, accompanied by an Oak Creek detective, arrived at her doorstep, her world shattered. But the grief quickly mutated into a cold, diamond-hard fury when she read the local news reports the next day. They were trying to paint her husband, a man of impeccable honor, as a violent thug. Vanessa hired a brilliant, relentless civil rights attorney named Victor Kane. Kane immediately demanded the release of Harlan's body cam footage and the dash cam from the cruiser. Days later, the chief of police, Elias Crow, held a somber press conference. "It is with deep regret," Chief Crow announced, looking perfectly rehearsed, "that we report a technical malfunction during the incident. Officer Harlan's body camera was inadvertently dislodged during the physical struggle and stopped recording moments before the shooting. The cruiser's dash cam view was obstructed by the suspect's vehicle. However, based on the physical evidence and witness testimony of the officer, the shooting has been ruled preliminarily justified. Officer Harlan is on paid administrative leave. The cover-up was textbook. It was clean. It was entirely expected. But they made one critical, fatal error. They underestimated the night shift clerk at the Chevron station, a young college student named Tyler Navarro. Tyler had been terrified during the shooting. He had ducked behind the counter when the shots rang out. When the police swarmed the station, Sergeant Langford had come inside, flashed his badge, and demanded access to the security DVR room. Langford had ordered Tyler out of the room, spent minutes inside, and then left, taking the entire DVR box with him for evidence. What Langford did not know was that the Chevron station had recently upgraded its security system. The cameras did not just record to the physical DVR in the back room. They simultaneously uploaded a backup stream to a secure cloud server hosted by the franchise owner. Furthermore, Tyler had been watching the live feed on his tablet under the counter. Tyler was terrified of the police, but he was haunted by the image of the man bleeding out on the pavement. Weeks after the shooting, after reading a plea from Vanessa Hale in the newspaper, Tyler bought a burner phone and called attorney Victor Kane. "Mr. Kane," Tyler whispered, locked in his apartment bathroom, "the police are lying. They took the hard drive, but I have the cloud login. I saw the whole thing. The officer attacked him. The man never reached for anything. He just stood there." Kane's heart hammered against his ribs. "Tyler, I need you to download that footage right now. Put it on 2 separate flash drives. I am coming to you." When Kane watched the silent, high-definition footage from the camera mounted directly above the pump, he did not just see a murder. He saw the end of Derek Harlan's life as a free man. The video showed Terrence calm and compliant. It showed Harlan rushing him, grabbing him, and executing him in cold blood. Kane bypassed the local district attorney who was in bed with the police union. He went straight to the state attorney general, a hard-nosed prosecutor named Ronan Vale, who had built his career on tearing down corrupt municipal departments. The hammer fell fast. A grand jury was convened in secret. They viewed the tape. It took them less than an hour to return the indictment. One morning, exactly 2 months after Terrence Hale was murdered, Officer Derek Harlan was sitting in his kitchen drinking coffee, fully expecting to be cleared and reinstated soon. The front door did not just open. It was breached by a tactical team from the state police. Harlan was slammed onto his own kitchen floor, handcuffs biting into his wrists as his wife screamed. The charges were read to him as he was hauled to his feet: murder in the second degree, official misconduct, and tampering with evidence. Months later, the city of Oak Creek was a powder keg. Protests had raged for weeks. The courthouse was fortified with concrete barriers and state troopers in riot gear. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Judge Evelyn Hart, a stern, no-nonsense jurist with decades on the bench, presided over the trial. At the prosecution table sat Attorney General Ronan Vale, flanked by his legal team and Vanessa Hale, who sat with a posture as straight and unyielding as her late husband's. At the defense table sat Derek Harlan. Despite facing life in prison, Harlan maintained an aura of arrogant indignation. His defense attorney, a slick, high-priced pit bull named Bradley Lang, paid for by the police union, had assured him that a jury would never convict a cop in this county if they played the split-second life-or-death card. The trial began with opening statements. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Bradley Lang prowled the well of the court, adjusting his silk tie, "police work is not pretty. It is a dangerous, split-second, terrifying job. Officer Harlan was alone in the dark with a non-compliant suspect who refused orders and suddenly made a furtive movement toward his waistband. It is a tragedy that Major Hale lost his life, but it is not a crime. Officer Harlan reacted exactly as his training dictated. He reacted to save his own life. Attorney General Ronan Vale's opening statement was brutally brief. He stood at the podium, looking directly at the jury box. "The defense wants you to believe this is a case about a split-second decision," Vale said, his voice echoing in the dead-silent room. "It is not. It is a case about a man who let his prejudice, his ego, and his rage pull the trigger, and a police department that tried to sweep a hero's murder under the rug. We will not ask you to imagine what happened that night. We are going to show it to you." The first days of the trial were a grueling slog. The defense successfully muddied the waters, cross-examining the medical examiner to suggest Terrence's body position could have been interpreted as aggressive. They brought in use-of-force experts who threw around buzzwords like action-reaction dynamics and perceived lethal threat. Harlan sat at the defense table, occasionally whispering to Lang, a faint, confident smirk playing on his lips. He was watching his union-bought defense dismantle the state's case piece by piece. He thought he was winning. Then came the pivotal day. "The state calls Tyler Navarro," Vale announced. The courtroom doors opened and the young gas station clerk walked down the aisle. He looked terrified, wearing an ill-fitting suit, his hands trembling as he took the oath. Harlan's smirk faltered slightly. He leaned over to Lang. "Who the hell is this kid?" Vale walked to the podium. "Mr. Navarro, where were you employed on the night of the shooting?" "I was the night cashier at the Chevron station on the interstate," Tyler answered, his voice cracking. "And were you present when Officer Harlan shot Major Hale?" "Yes, sir. I was inside the store, Mr. Vale." Vale continued softly. "Did you see what happened?" "I saw everything. I was watching the live camera feed on my tablet." Lang immediately shot up. "Objection hearsay, Your Honor. The state has already stipulated that the security DVR was seized by the police and found to be corrupted by a power surge." Judge Hart looked down at Vale. "Counsel." "Your Honor," Vale said, a cold smile touching his eyes. "The physical DVR was indeed corrupted. Interestingly, it was corrupted after Sergeant Langford took it into custody. However, the defense failed to realize that the Chevron franchise utilizes a redundant cloud backup system." Harlan's face drained of all color. The pencil in his hand snapped with an audible crack. "The state asked to enter Exhibit C into evidence. The unedited high-definition overhead video from the pump," Vale said. "Objection!" Lang barked, panic finally bleeding into his voice. "We were not provided this in discovery." "Yes, you were, Mr. Lang," Vale countered smoothly. "It was buried in the terabytes of digital data we handed over months ago. File folder labeled Cloud Backup. It is not our fault if the defense did not review the evidence thoroughly." Judge Hart peered over her glasses at Lang. "Overruled. Play the tape, Mr. Vale." The lights in the courtroom dimmed. A large screen descended from the ceiling. The video was utterly silent, which made it all the more horrifying. The jury watched in absolute stillness. They saw Terrence Hale pumping gas. They saw the cruiser aggressively block him in. They saw Terrence raise his hands immediately. They saw him speaking calmly. They saw Harlan charge forward, grab the major, and shove him. And then, clear as day, from a top-down angle, they saw Terrence Hale slowly, deliberately reach for his back pocket with 2 fingers, not his waistband. They saw Harlan draw his weapon and fire 3 times into Terrence's chest. There was no struggle. There was no lunging. There was just an execution. When the video ended, a collective gasp hung in the courtroom air. One of the jurors, a middle-aged woman in the front row, was openly weeping. Vanessa Hale squeezed her eyes shut, tears streaming down her face as Kane put a comforting arm around her. Harlan was no longer smirking. He was staring at the blank screen, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with the realization of a trapped animal. The blue wall of silence had not just cracked. It had been pulverized into dust. "Mr. Navarro," Vale said, breaking the heavy silence, "after the shooting, did an Oak Creek police officer enter your store?" Tyler swallowed hard. "Yes, a sergeant. He told me to get the hell out of the back room. He took the recording machine. He looked at me, touched the gun on his belt, and told me that if I knew what was good for me, I didn't see anything." Pandemonium erupted in the courtroom. Judge Evelyn Hart's gavel slammed down with the force of a thunderclap, repeatedly striking the wooden block until the uproar in the gallery subsided into a shocked, vibrating murmur. "Order," she commanded, her voice cutting through the tension like a steel blade. "One more outburst like that, and I will clear this courtroom. Mr. Lang, do you wish to cross-examine the witness?" Bradley Lang, the high-priced defense attorney, looked like a man who had just been shoved out of a perfectly good airplane without a parachute. He stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with trembling fingers. He had built his entire career on the ambiguity of police encounters, the murky gray area of perceived threats. That video had just burned his gray area to the ground in high-definition color. "I have a few questions, Your Honor," Lang said, his voice lacking its usual theatrical boom. He approached the podium, glaring at young Tyler Navarro. "Mr. Navarro, you claim Sergeant Langford intimidated you, but you didn't report this to the authorities for weeks, did you?" "I was terrified, sir," Tyler replied, his voice shaking, but his gaze holding steady. "A police officer had just murdered a man in front of me, and another officer threatened me to keep quiet. Who exactly was I supposed to report it to? The Oak Creek police?" A ripple of nervous laughter and murmurs of agreement swept through the jury box. Lang flushed dark red. "Furthermore, Mr. Navarro," Lang pivoted, desperate to muddy the waters, "that camera angle is from directly above. It does not show what Officer Harlan saw from his ground-level perspective. You cannot testify to what Officer Harlan believed in that split second, can you?" "I can testify to what Major Hale did," Tyler said simply. "And he did nothing to deserve dying." "No further questions," Lang snapped, retreating to his table. The prosecution rested its case on that devastating high note. The defense was now cornered. Lang asked for a recess, which the judge granted. In the holding room, Lang turned to Derek Harlan. The arrogant smirk was completely gone from Harlan's face. It was replaced by a hollow, cornered panic. "Derek, we are bleeding out," Lang said bluntly, dropping his briefcase on the table. "That video is a kill shot. We have one play left. You have to take the stand. You have to sell the jury on the psychological phenomenon of tunnel vision. You have to make them believe that in the dark, with the rain, your brain registered a lethal threat, even if one wasn't there." The next morning, the courthouse air was thick with anticipation. Derek Harlan took the stand. He wore a slightly oversized conservative gray suit, a deliberate choice to make the aggressive, heavily muscled officer look smaller, more vulnerable. Lang led him gently through his career, highlighting his years of service and the inherent dangers of the job. Then they arrived at the night of the shooting. "Officer Harlan, when you approached Major Hale, what was going through your mind?" Lang asked sympathetically. Harlan looked directly at the jury, his eyes wide, attempting to project raw vulnerability. "I was terrified. It was dark. He was a large man. He was non-compliant. When he suddenly spun back toward me and dropped his hand toward his waist, my training took over. I experienced auditory exclusion, tunnel vision. I honestly, truly believed he was pulling a firearm. I thought I was never going to see my family again." It was a rehearsed, polished performance. A few jurors looked down, seemingly uncomfortable. Then Attorney General Ronan Vale stood up for cross-examination. He did not walk to the podium. He carried a remote control and walked directly toward the jury box standing just a few feet from Harlan. "Mr. Harlan," Vale began, his tone conversationally cold, "you testified that Major Hale was non-compliant. Let's look at the video again." Vale clicked the remote. The screen lowered. The video played. "Pause it right there," Vale ordered his tech assistant. The image froze on Terrence Hale, standing with his hands clearly resting on the roof of the SUV. "Are his hands visible, Mr. Harlan?" Harlan swallowed hard. "Yes." "He was complying with your order to place his hands on the vehicle, wasn't he?" "He was moving erratically," Harlan countered defensively. "Play the video at quarter speed," Vale commanded. The footage crawled forward. Terrence's hands slowly, deliberately moved toward his back pocket. "Now, Mr. Harlan, you testified you saw him reach for his waistband. Let's look closely. Is his hand anywhere near the front of his waistband?" "From my angle." "I am not asking about your angle. I am asking what is happening in objective reality," Vale interrupted sharply. "Is his hand near his front waistband?" Harlan gripped the edges of the witness box. "No. It is moving toward his back pocket, where a man typically keeps his wallet," Vale noted. "Where he told you he was reaching to get the ID you demanded. Let's keep playing." The video crept forward. Harlan rushed into the frame, grabbing Terrence. He braced himself. "He resisted," Harlan blurted out, losing his composure. "He balanced himself because you violently shoved him from behind without provocation," Vale fired back, his voice rising, filling the room. "And then in less than 2 seconds, you unholstered your weapon and fired 3 hollow-point rounds into the chest of an unarmed American soldier." "I thought he had a gun," Harlan yelled, his face turning purple, the carefully crafted facade of a frightened public servant cracking to reveal the aggressive bully beneath. "He wouldn't listen to me. You weren't there. You don't know what it's like on the streets with these people." Silence slammed into the courtroom. "These people." Vale slowly lowered the remote. He looked at the jury. Several of them were staring at Harlan with undisguised disgust. Vanessa Hale sat stone-faced, her eyes boring holes into the man who had murdered her husband. "No, Mr. Harlan," Vale said softly, turning his back on the witness. "I don't know what it's like to shoot a hero in the back because my ego felt bruised. No further questions." The defense rested its case that afternoon. The atmosphere in the courtroom felt absolute and final. Harlan's explosive loss of temper on the stand had virtually sealed his fate. But Attorney General Ronan Vale was not finished. He had promised Vanessa Hale not just a conviction, but the total destruction of the corrupt system that had allowed this to happen. "Your Honor," Vale announced the next morning, "the state calls a rebuttal witness. We call Sergeant Marcus Langford." The gas that went through the police union representative seated in the back row was audible. Harlan, who had been staring at the table, jerked his head up. His eyes widened in absolute shock. Marcus Langford walked through the heavy wooden doors. He was not in uniform. He wore a wrinkled brown suit, his posture slumped, looking years older than he had on the night of the shooting. He walked past the defense table without making eye contact with Harlan. Langford took the oath and sat down, staring at his hands. "Sergeant Langford," Vale began, standing casually by the prosecution table, "you've been granted sweeping immunity by the State Attorney General's office regarding the events following the death of Major Hale. Is that correct?" "Yes," Langford rasped. He cleared his throat. "Yes, sir. You were Officer Harlan's immediate supervisor. You were the first on the scene. Tell the jury what you found." Langford took a shaky breath. "I arrived at the Chevron station. Major Hale was on the ground. He was gone. I checked him for weapons. He was completely clean. Just his military ID. And what did Officer Harlan tell you had happened?" Langford finally looked up, his eyes locking onto Harlan's across the room. The betrayal hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Derek, Officer Harlan was pacing, Langford said slowly, the words seemingly dragged out of him. I asked him what happened. I told him the guy was clean, that he was an Army major. I asked him why he shot. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the rain tapping against the high bulletproof windows. What was his exact response, Sergeant? Vale pressed. He didn't say he saw a gun, Langford confessed, his voice breaking. He said the guy had an attitude. He thought he was untouchable. He wouldn't bow down, Marcus. I had to show him who runs this pavement. A collective shudder ran through the gallery. Vanessa Hale let out a sharp, involuntary sob and buried her face in her hands. Harlan leaped to his feet, his chair crashing backward to the floor. You liar! You lying, cowardly piece of garbage! He screamed, spit flying from his lips. I covered for you for years. You're selling me out to save your own pension. Bailiffs, restrain the defendant, Judge Hart roared, slamming her gavel. 2 massive state troopers flanked Harlan, forcing him back into his seat by his shoulders. Lang sat frozen, his hands covering his face, recognizing the exact moment his career took a fatal hit. Sergeant Langford, Vale continued, unbothered by the outburst, did Officer Harlan ask you to help him cover up the murder? Langford wiped a tear from his eye. Yes. We knew the dash cam was blocked, but Derek knew his body cam caught the whole thing. He took the SD card out of his body camera, right there under the gas station canopy, and crushed it under his boot. Then he told me I needed to go inside and get the store's security footage. And did you? Yes. I intimidated the clerk. I took the DVR machine, put it in the trunk of my cruiser, and later that night I erased the hard drive with a high-powered magnet before logging it into evidence. Langford looked down at his trembling hands. I traded my soul to protect the badge. But when I saw that video, when I saw the man's face, a man who fought for this country, I couldn't live with the ghost anymore. The blue wall of silence had not just cracked. It had spectacularly collapsed in front of a live national audience. The cover-up was completely exposed, tracing the corruption all the way up the chain of command. Karma had not only come for Derek Harlan, it was coming for the entire Oak Creek Police Department. The weekend following Sergeant Marcus Langford's explosive, foundation-shattering testimony passed like a held breath over the sprawling, rain-soaked city of Oak Creek. When court reconvened for closing arguments, the atmosphere inside the mahogany-paneled courtroom was heavy enough to crush bone. The gallery was packed far beyond its legal capacity. Reporters, civil rights advocates, off-duty officers in plain clothes, and grieving community members sat shoulder to shoulder, their collective anxiety raising the temperature in the room. Outside the courthouse, a fortress of concrete barricades separated a sea of protesters from the flanks of state troopers. The national news cameras were rolling live, broadcasting the final chapter of a trial that had torn the veneer off American policing. Inside, the rain lashed violently against the high bulletproof windows, a haunting rhythmic echo of the freezing downpour on the night of the shooting. Bradley Lang, the high-priced defense attorney bankrolled by the police union, stood up first. He looked exhausted, the bespoke tailoring of his charcoal suit unable to hide the profound slump in his shoulders. He was a man who had built a lucrative career operating in the murky gray shadows of justified force. But the Chevron station's cloud-backed security video had burned his shadows away in high-definition color. Still, he was a professional, and he had to mount a defense no matter how desperate. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Lang began, his voice lacking its trademark theatrical boom, replaced instead by a somber, pleading tone. He walked slowly toward the jury box, his hands gripping the wooden railing. "You heard a very dramatic, very disturbing story. You heard a man, Sergeant Marcus Langford, sit in that chair and confess to horrific, unthinkable crimes. He admitted to destroying evidence, intimidating a witness, and lying to investigators." Lang paused, letting the weight of Langford's admitted sins settle over the jurors. Then he pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at the empty witness stand. But ask yourselves, why did he suddenly find his conscience? He confessed because the state attorney general backed him into a corner with federal indictments and offered him the holy grail of plea deals, sweeping total immunity. Sergeant Langford is a rat fleeing a sinking ship. He is a man willing to say absolutely whatever the prosecution scripts for him in order to save his own skin, keep his freedom, and protect his taxpayer-funded pension. You cannot, you must not send a decorated officer to prison for the rest of his life, based on the purchased testimony of an admitted liar. Lang turned and walked back to the defense table, gesturing toward Derek Harlan. Harlan sat rigidly, his face a mask of pale, sweating terror, his knuckles white as he gripped the edges of the heavy oak table. The prosecution wants you to watch that silent video and judge Officer Harlan from the safety, warmth, and comfort of this courtroom, Lang continued, his voice rising, trying to manufacture a passionate defense out of thin air. They want you to use the luxury of hindsight. But Officer Harlan did not have hindsight. He was alone in the freezing rain at night, confronting a man he knew nothing about. And let us be brutally honest about who that man was. Major Terrence Hale was an Army Ranger. He was a highly trained, lethal weapon, conditioned for close-quarters combat. When he refused a direct order to keep his hands still, when he spun and reached toward his back pocket, Officer Harlan did not see a father or a soldier. He saw a threat moving with military precision. Lang wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. You must look at those 3 seconds in the rain. Not the tragic aftermath, but the agonizing split-second reality of police work. If there is even a shadow of a doubt in your mind, even a fraction of a % of a doubt that Officer Harlan genuinely, in his heart, believed his life was about to be extinguished, the law explicitly dictates you must acquit. It is a tragedy that Major Hale lost his life. It breaks our collective hearts. But a tragic mistake in the line of duty is not murder in the second degree. It was a grueling, desperate argument attempting to weaponize the victim's honorable military service against him. When Lang finally sat down, he did not even look at his client. Attorney General Ronan Vale took his time standing up. He did not carry notes. He did not adjust his suit. He simply walked to the center of the room, radiating the quiet, devastating authority of an avalanche that had already begun its inescapable descent. Reasonable doubt, Vale said softly, the words echoing in the dead silent room. He did not yell. He did not need to. The defense wants you to believe that Derek Harlan made a mistake, a split-second error in judgment born of fear. Vale slowly turned and pointed directly at the large projector screen, still hanging above the witness stand, a blank white canvas waiting for the truth. It takes exactly 0.8 seconds to pull the trigger of a Glock 3 times, Vale stated, his voice ringing with absolute, chilling clarity. But it took years of unchecked aggression, years of racial prejudice, and years of a corrupt, toxic police culture to put Derek Harlan in that parking lot, believing he possessed the divine right to act as judge, jury, and executioner on the asphalt. Vale began to pace, his eyes locking onto each juror, ensuring they felt the gravity of history in the room. Mr. Lang wants you to believe Officer Harlan was terrified because Major Hale was an Army Ranger. Let us examine that offensive, desperate logic. Major Hale survived roadside bombs in the Arghandab River Valley. He survived vicious, chaotic firefights. He was a man who actually knew what a lethal threat looked like. And what did his military training teach him to do that night? It taught him to remain perfectly calm. It taught him to keep his hands visible. It taught him to speak respectfully, even while being unlawfully detained and verbally abused by a man whose ego was writing checks his badge could not cash. Vale walked over to the prosecution table and gently placed his hand on the shoulder of Vanessa Hale. She sat perfectly still, dressed in a sharp black suit, radiating a dignified, quiet strength that contrasted sharply with the trembling cowardice of the man at the defense table. Terrence Hale bled for the very freedoms we are utilizing in this courtroom today, Vale continued, his voice thick with a profound, unfeigned emotion. He came home to his wife and his children, only to be gunned down at a gas station by a man sworn to protect him. And what was Officer Harlan's immediate reaction? Did he render first aid? Did he weep for the life he just took? No. He crushed his body camera's memory card under his boot. He conspired with his sergeant to magnetically wipe a hard drive. He spent the following months trying to drag a dead American hero's name through the mud. Vale turned back to the jury box, his expression hardening into pure righteous granite. Sergeant Langford did not manufacture that video in the cloud. The video is the undisputed, unblinking truth. It does not show fear. It shows malice. It shows murder. Do not let this man hide for one more second behind the badge he so completely disgraced. Bring back a verdict that tells the Hale family, that tells the Oak Creek Police Department, and that tells the entire country that no one, absolutely no one, is above the law. Vale sat down. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the muffled sounds of Vanessa Hale quietly crying. Her husband's silver dog tags clutched tightly in her fist. Judge Evelyn Hart adjusted her reading glasses. Her face was an unreadable mask of judicial neutrality, but her voice carried the sharp edge of a razor as she read the jury their final instructions. She meticulously outlined the parameters of second-degree murder, official misconduct, and tampering with evidence. At mid-morning, the bailiff swore his oath, and the jury was dismissed to deliberate. The agonizing wait began. In a private, windowless waiting room down the hall, Vanessa Hale sat with attorney Victor Kane and Gregory Vale. They drank awful bitter coffee from styrofoam cups. Vanessa did not speak. She just stared at the ticking clock on the wall, praying that the universe still held some semblance of moral balance. 3 floors down, in the courthouse's subterranean holding cells, Derek Harlan sat on a steel bench. The arrogant smirk that had defined his career was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, sickening dread. He was sweating through his undershirt. He paced the tiny cell, the walls seeming to close in on him. He realized with agonizing clarity that his union representatives were not coming to bail him out. The police chief was not calling the mayor to make this go away. The blue wall had crumbled, and he was standing naked in the wreckage. They thought they would have to wait days. They thought they would have to endure a weekend of agonizing uncertainty. They did not. Hours later, the sharp, startling buzz of the intercom echoed through the judge's chambers. The bailiff picked up the receiver, listened for a moment, and turned to Judge Hart. The jury had a verdict. The air in the district courtroom was no longer just heavy. It was practically petrified. As the heavy oak doors swung open and the 12 men and women of the jury filed back into their seats, a suffocating silence gripped the gallery. Derek Harlan was escorted back to the defense table by 2 state troopers who looked at him not as a brother in blue, but as a disgraced inmate. Harlan's face was the color of wet ash. He was physically trembling, his eyes darting frantically around the room, looking for a lifeline that simply did not exist. His wife's seat in the second row remained conspicuously empty. She had filed for divorce weeks into the trial, taking their 2 daughters and moving across the country to escape the radioactive fallout of his crimes. He was utterly, devastatingly alone. Across the aisle, Vanessa Hale sat perfectly still, flanked by Attorney General Ronan Vale and her civil rights lawyer, Victor Kane. She held her breath, her thumb rhythmically rubbing the raised lettering on her late husband's silver dog tags. Judge Evelyn Hart took her seat at the high bench, her expression as unyielding as carved granite. She looked out over the packed room, ensuring absolute order before nodding to the jury box. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson, a retired middle school history teacher named Martha Higgins, stood up. She held a single crisp sheet of paper. Her hands, unlike Harlan's, were perfectly steady. We have, Your Honor. The defendant will rise, Judge Hart commanded. Bradley Lang practically had to haul Harlan to his feet by the elbow. Harlan swayed, his knees buckling slightly under the crushing weight of impending doom. On the first count of the indictment, murder in the second degree, Judge Hart's voice projected through the silent room. How do you find? Martha Higgins looked directly at Derek Harlan, her voice ringing with absolute, undeniable clarity. We find the defendant, Derek Harlan, guilty. A collective shuddering gasp ripped through the gallery. Vanessa Hale squeezed her eyes shut, a dam breaking as silent, heavy tears streamed down her cheeks. Vale placed a firm, comforting hand on her shoulder. On the second count, official misconduct, guilty. On the third count, tampering with physical evidence, guilty. The final word hit Harlan like 3 physical blows to the chest. His legs completely gave out. He collapsed backward, his chair crashing loudly onto the hardwood floor. He curled into himself, covering his face with his hands, as a ragged, pathetic wail tore from his throat. The arrogant, swaggering predator who had terrorized the streets of Oak Creek was gone, replaced by a broken, terrified shell of a man realizing his life was over. Bradley Lang took a slow step away from his client, thoroughly defeated, his career forever stained by this catastrophic loss. Bailiffs, get the defendant on his feet, Judge Hart roared, banging her gavel to cut through the rising murmur of the crowd. 2 massive state troopers hauled Harlan upright, gripping his arm so tightly he winced. Officer Harlan, Judge Hart said, leaning over the bench, her eyes blazing with an intense, righteous fury that captivated the entire room. In my decades presiding over this court, I have rarely witnessed a more callous, arrogant, and cowardly abuse of authority. You took a sacred oath to protect and serve your community. Instead, you operated as an apex predator in a uniform. You stole a devoted father, a loving husband, and a decorated American patriot from this world over a bruised ego. And then, like a coward in the night, you used the very badge you soiled to try and bury the truth. Judge Hart picked up her gavel, her grip white-knuckled. Normally, I would schedule a separate sentencing hearing. However, given the overwhelming, irrefutable nature of the video evidence and the profound danger your absolute lack of remorse poses to society, I am exercising my discretion under state law to sentence you immediately. Society requires that you do not spend another minute breathing free air. Derek Harlan, for the cold-blooded murder of Major Terrence Hale, I sentence you to 25 years to life in the maximum security wing of the state penitentiary. You are to serve this sentence without the possibility of parole until the mandatory minimum is met. You are remanded immediately to the custody of the Department of Corrections. Bang! The sharp crack of the gavel was the violent period at the end of Derek Harlan's freedom. Handcuffs were brutally ratcheted onto his wrists, biting into the skin. As the troopers dragged him aggressively toward the heavy side door leading to the holding cells, Harlan looked back over his shoulder at the gallery. He did not see a single sympathetic face. He saw the disgusted glares of the public. He saw the rolling lenses of the national media. And finally, he saw Vanessa Hale. She was looking right through him, an expression of profound, unbreakable peace settling over her tear-streaked face. But the merciless hand of karma did not stop with Derek Harlan. His conviction was merely the earthquake. The devastating tsunami followed immediately. Armed with Sergeant Marcus Langford's sworn testimony and the confiscated, magnetically scrubbed hard drives, Attorney General Ronan Vale launched a massive, unprecedented RICO investigation into the entire Oak Creek Police Department. The dominoes fell with brutal efficiency. Within months, Chief of Police Elias Crow was indicted on federal charges of racketeering, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. 8 other officers, the key architects who had helped construct and maintain the Blue Wall of Silence, were unceremoniously stripped of their badges. Their taxpayer-funded pensions were dissolved, and they were handed lengthy federal prison sentences. The deeply corrupt system that had shielded Derek Harlan and terrorized a community for years was systematically burned to the ground, its ashes scattered by the undeniable power of the truth. Justice is rarely a straight line. It is often a jagged, painful path carved through the heart of unimaginable tragedy. The sentencing of Derek Harlan to 25 years behind bars could never bring back Major Terrence Hale. It could never return a devoted father to his children or a loving husband to his wife. However, his sacrifice was not in vain. The undeniable recorded truth of his murder acted as a blinding spotlight, exposing the deep rot within a corrupt department and forcing a brutal reckoning that changed a city forever. Karma is not just a cosmic balancing of scales. In this courtroom, it was the relentless pursuit of truth by those who fiercely refused to be silenced. Terrence Hale lived his entire life with unshakable honor. And in the end, it was that exact unyielding honor that brought down the monsters hiding in the dark. Thank you for listening to the whole story, and if you want to see more true crime stories and the consequences of karma like this, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. Stay safe, stay smart, and see you in the next video.